Hi guys, welcome. It's so good to see you here. I've been getting lots of requests for more bird tutorials, so today we're painting a cedar waxwing. Let's get started. I started by freehand sketching on the bird. I printed the bird on a piece of paper in the exact same size that I was going to be doing the painting, and this is really helpful when you're making visual measurements and sketching something. My paper today is Baohong Academy watercolor paper. It's a Chinese brand, and it's actually a pretty decent and fairly inexpensive cotton watercolor paper. I taped off the edges because it's a 7 by 10 inch block, which means it's not a very conventional size. So with a 1/2 inch piece of tape around the edge, it's 6 by 9 inches, which makes for easier framing. For the branches, I changed the design quite a bit and added some berries, filling it out a little bit more and just designing it how I wanted to. That's the beauty of being an artist. You can do this. You can make those changes and make it even better than what you're seeing in the photograph. Once I was happy with my sketch, I started with a wet and wet technique for the background. I took clean water. I'm using my silver black velvet size 8 round brush, and pretty much applied it all over, even allowing some of the water to overlap into the bird. If you're going to start with wet and wet, definitely start with light layers at first so you don't accidentally cover up any areas that you want to remain white. You can also avoid those areas by just not covering them with water and painting around them with the water initially. This first color is QOR Phthalo Blue, and it's providing a nice wintry background color. Of course, it will dry a little bit lighter, so if it feels a little bit dark at first, don't worry. Remember, watercolor dries lighter, and I think it's creating a really nice wintry setting for my bird starting out. I next mix up some browns. This is burnt umber and burnt sienna, and wet and wet, I'm just dabbing in the shapes of some branches behind the bird, and an initial wash of color on the inside of the bird's body along its back, along the wings, avoiding the belly since that's going to be a lighter value. I'm just carefully tracing in some light brown branches, filling in the color of the branch that the bird is sitting on, and blotting in some more shapes, keeping in mind that those will blend out and look really nice and soft as the paper begins to dry. With the background mostly dry, I'm now going in with some Hansa yellow light. You could also use lemon yellow. This is a really nice cool yellow color, and I'm using this to paint a light wash in the belly of the bird. For the area under the tail feathers, I'm using Transparent Orange by Winsor & Newton with a little bit of burnt sienna to darken up in some shadow areas underneath the wings, and a little bit of cadmium red where I want it to be a slightly warmer color. I'm still working with my size 8 round brush, which is an amazing brush because it can do so many things. It can do broad washes and tiny details. As you can see here, I'm working really tiny with the little bits of orange around the head of the bird. My paper is still somewhat damp, so the paint is still softening and blending out nicely. I'm applying a first layer of color for the berries. This color is called Scarlet Lake. It's a color by Holbein, and it's one of my favorite reds, especially for things like cherries or berries or bright Christmassy red colors. If you're finding this video helpful, please leave me a comment below and hit that like button. This really helps me out as a creator to continue to bring you guys great free content like this, so thank you. I'm making sure to leave some highlights on the berries so they look nice and shiny and smooth. This is an important detail if you want to add an extra element of realism to your painting. The tip of the tail is bright yellow, so I'm using a pure Hansa yellow light for that color and applying that same color on some of the details in the wings. Coming back into the body of the bird, I'm re-wetting the whole body with clean water. I'm mixing up a combination of Daniel Smith indigo and a little bit of burnt umber, and this is creating a really rich gray, a really dark gray, dropping that in wet and wet all along the top wing of the bird. You'll notice those little markings on the wings I did not wet, and so the paint is effectively moving around those. Remember that where you apply water, the paint will go, so you want to be careful wherever you apply your water to the paper. Here on the head, I'm using more burnt umber. This is my nice warm brown. And then as I continue to paint along the back of the bird, I'm using that combination of indigo and burnt umber. Creates a nice neutral dark gray. I'm adding another light layer of gray on the belly. For the legs, again, I'm using that same combination of indigo and burnt umber, which is a nice neutral gray, and just filling them in with a solid color for a first layer. I'm lifting some of the paint out of the wing to restore a little highlight along there, and on the top of the head, I'm using my burnt umber, quite watered down. I switched to my smaller brush. I'm using my Itty Bitty Orange Synthetic Brush by Benson, and this is perfect for those tiny little details. I want to carefully paint around all of those highlights, those white markings on the beak. Another difference between my painting and the reference photo is that in the reference photo you really couldn't see any highlights in the eye, and so I'm actually including a couple just to make the eye a little bit more visible, to make it more lifelike and to really pop. Painting the dark marking under the beak and blending that into some burnt umber, pulling that color down into the belly, and then adding a wash of color all across the neck. Here on the belly, which has dried by now, I'm using more of a separated brush stroke. Before we go on, I wanted to let you guys know that this tutorial is available in real time. Just head over to emilyolsonart.com where you can sign up to become a member and access more than 60 fully narrated real-time tutorials for just a small amount per month. With your membership, you'll have access to my watercolor jumpstart guide, which is a great place to start if you're a beginner. I also have a series of 20-minute frame-worthy tutorials that will give you little wins in your watercolor journey. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check out all the tutorials that are currently available. All right, let's get back to the video. Moving on to the head, once again, I'm adding another layer of watered down burnt umber underneath the eyes and blending that into the wet wash that I already applied to the neck. Here, just underneath the crest on the head, I'm applying some burnt sienna. The wings are now dry, so I can add another layer with more detailed feather texture. I'm darkening that up with another wash of my burnt umber indigo mixture, and even applying a little bit of texture by laying down side by side separate little brush strokes, leaving tiny highlights in between. I'm using a darker combination, more black, as I come towards the ends of the feathers here, and working really carefully and slowly around those white feathers. These Benson brushes are absolutely wonderful if you're looking for a brush that's springy, that holds a nice tight, tiny point, and that is capable of the tiniest details imaginable. I'm applying a really dark streak of black just underneath the wing. This is one of those paintings that started out fairly flat looking, and I wasn't very convinced that it was going to be a great painting. In fact, I almost gave up on it a couple of times, but as soon as I added these dark pops of black and stronger contrast within the feathers, I realized it was going to come together and we could salvage the painting after all. So if you're in the same stage where you're working on a painting and it's just not looking lifelike, see it through to the end, stick with it, and add those dark colors, add the dark contrast, and you're going to be amazed at how much more realistic it looks. Watercolor paintings often go through a lot of different ugly phases, so you just have to push past that and see it through to the end. So I'm adding these final feather details to the bird, and I'm finally really happy with how it's starting to look, especially now that I have all of these dark black feathers on, and the white feathers and those yellow feathers are really popping. Here on the belly, I'm adding a shadow shape just under the wing. I apply a streak of gray and then soften it with clean water so that it appears really nice and blended and soft. The top of the head needs one more layer of dark color, so this is burnt sienna that I'm applying over the top of that transparent orange and adding these really nice little details on the beak. I'm darkening the crest with a little bit of burnt umber and darkening one more time underneath the eyes. That's really helping the head look dimensional and realistic. I'm adding a couple of tiny, short, quick parallel brush strokes indicating some feather texture. With enough water, those will soften out really well. For the legs, I just need to go darker with these and add some shadow shapes, some details around the claws. So once again, I'm using my combination of indigo and burnt umber. I rarely use pure black for painting. You could use black, or Payne's gray would be another option, or neutral tint. Really any wonderful dark color will work well for these legs. So with the claws, I'm just avoiding some white highlights to help them look more realistic. And after the bird is finished, I continue painting the tree and the background. I'm adding a few more feather details just under the belly to help it pop against the background. And for those berries, I'm mostly using my Scarlet Lake color, alizarin crimson, some burnt umber, and for the branches, I'm using burnt umber and indigo. The background probably took almost as much time as the bird itself because I did spend quite a bit of time on those berries. But of course, if you want to see the real-time version, you can see the whole thing on my website, emilyolsonart.com. I added another layer of phthalo blue to the background just to make that winter blue pop even more, and I added some pink blooms using alizarin crimson and Scarlet Lake, suggesting some more berries blurred out in the background. And then for a final touch, I added some transparent orange spatter and a couple of little blossoms, and I think it looks really whimsical and lovely. So there's our finished cedar waxwing. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, like, and comment, and I'll see you in the next one.